real-time signal and intelligence, just signals coming in, right, is incredibly important. It allows us to be proactive versus reactive. That shows the power of this, open source, intelligence gathering apparatus. We started seeing, how the storm was turning, but not only that, but seeing the Samdesk alerts to infrastructure being affected at the time.
Hi, everybody. My name is James Neufeld. I am the CEO and founder here at Samdesk, and delighted to be talking to another one of our power users here at Samdesk. And, really the two reasons that we love these conversations and why we're kind of, taking the time to have these conversations is, one of the things that we are greatly privileged to hear about at Samdesk a lot is just how important the work is that a lot of our users do. And a lot of our users do incredibly important, mission-critical, life-saving work around the world every single day. And so it's a great privilege for us to hear these stories at Samdesk all the time when we talk to our users about how they're using the platform in these day-to-day situations. But more importantly, we get to hear about, really why it is they do what they do, and to hear those stories is always incredible. So that's one of the reasons that we want to, bring the spotlight to some of this really important work that our users are doing. The second part that we really like to do here, right, is to really just unpack how the Samdesk platform is happening in real world situations. So even though we here at Samdesk, we build the features, the products, and the tools, we're also continually surprised by all the various different use cases from our users that we ourselves did not envision. And we keep hearing them constantly around like, hey, here was a situation, here's where you guys were useful. Like, that's very, very cool. And so let's talk about that. Let's unpack that with our users. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So that's why we're here today. And so delighted to have Nate Goggans, who is the GSOC Operator at Aerial Recovery. It's a nonprofit, conducting rescue and response missions in some of the most difficult situations in the world. Nate's going to talk to us a little bit more about that. So why don't we jump in? It's really great to have you, Nate. And thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's dig in. And so rather than, me trying to explain what you guys do, why don't you just tell us a little bit about aerial recovery and your role there?
Sure. So aerial recovery, nonprofit, the term we've coined is Humanitarian Special Operators. So our volunteer, our core leadership comes from the veteran community. So predominantly a special operations area. We're actually founded and led by a Green Beret. So a lot of our methodology, our approach to situations in the field is all done around that. Air recovery kind of operates under three real main pillars. One is, that disaster response for both, natural disasters and man-made disasters. And then the second pillar is anti-human trafficking. So we do a lot in that realm, tied to the disaster response, and meaning typically we see a lot of human trafficking, type of activity when there is a large influx of people out of a country or a chaotic situation. Ukraine's a great example. And then the third piece of that is what we call heal the heroes. So we take those veterans that are getting out and we kind of give them purpose again and help them through a healing process. We have a whole program that they go to. It's like, 4 long phases. It's a full year program. Kind of help them heal and then provide that purpose by, giving back and using their skill set to, make the world a better place to save lives.
Amazing. I think we're going to unpack some of those, real world situations and examples in a little bit here. But before we go down that path, let's talk about you a little bit more. Why do you do what you do?
For me, it's very personal. So I am a veteran, not as long as most of the people on our team, right? I didn't retire. I former law enforcement, but then I got into, the whole tech world, from a business perspective, right? I mean, that's been my career. And I've always had this desire to give back. And I've always had this kind of dream of using like enterprise level technologies and, the whole tech world to kind of give back and make the world a better place. One of the things that always infuriates me is, we have all of this amazing technology in the world today. And seems like a lot of times we can only, use it most people just use it to line their pocketbooks or, for very personal, greedy reasons. And I just kind of a champion to see that used for a force for good.
So tell me a little bit about, just kind of building on that, how does your job fit into the overall work and mission at aerial recovery?
So I am kind of the guru for all things operational center, all of our technology that we employ, all the intelligence that we use to execute, plan, and execute our missions. So that can be anything from assigning out cell phones or situational awareness tools to internet connectivity to an actual full-blown operations center that will deploy out in the field or in a hotel room or in a warehouse and actually run operations. So, I mean, we actually run it just like a military unit would with what they call, a tactical operations center or a TOC. We actually run that and we staff it 24/7 while the operation is going. So there's a full-blown SOP that, that we follow to execute, plan, and execute those missions. But I'm not just, affectionately refer to myself sometimes as a propeller head, but I'm also operational, right? So I get out in the field. Matter of fact, I'm heading out next week to on the ground mission in a war zone. So I like to do both.
Super incredible to hear all of that, and also just just hitting on some of the mission and kind of mandate that you guys have at aerial recovery is phenomenal. And so let's unpack, I guess, that kind of that role of technology and I think from a real time perspective component, right? And so this is kind of bubbled up to my desk with just kind of hearing some of the real world situations of real time signals that are happening. So so first of all, maybe let's start at a very high level, and then we'll get into some of the more granular kind of real world examples as is appropriate from a historical standpoint, at least. We've been seeing this huge shift from intelligence would typically come from on the ground sources, right? Like you need to have somebody on the ground, you need to be getting this sort of information. Along comes social media and real time signals, and it's kind of flipping things around on its head, right? I mean, now you're looking at all this data around you, right? So how from your standpoint, right? How crucial are real time signals becoming to the work that you do specifically, but overall for aerial recovery as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, real time signal intelligence, just signals coming in, right, is incredibly important, right? It allows us to be proactive versus reactive. That's one of the main things. Operators on the field, we're used to kind of going off of feelings, right? Looking at this situation doesn't feel right. And unfortunately, with that kind of mentality, you can only see what's in your immediate area, right? So I think a lot of what this gives us, and I've got a ton of examples I can share, but we're able to see trends developing in our, we call it battle space, right? But in our battle space, and see how that can possibly be affecting our operations, not just in the moment, but tomorrow, right? Or the next day, or when it's time to actually pull back and get out of the, that particular area. But I would go not just, to that active intelligence, like OSINT type information that comes in, but just data points in general, right? All the different from demographic data to, all the other data points that are collected today. All of those are incredibly useful in creating this overall picture of where's the need, where do we need to go, do we need to pre-position equipment for, all of that kind of stuff. So it takes us from being reactive to proactive in a very real sense.
So let's dig in. So, help our viewers kind of understand, what are one or two examples that come to mind of, real world situations where a real time signal has impacted operations for you guys?
I can think of two very different situations, but one is our operation in Pakistan just 2 months ago. So a lot of people don't know massive floodings that were happening in Pakistan, something like 30 million people affected. It's incredibly horrible. We sent a small team in there to, kind of facilitate, help another nonprofit distribute some aid, right? And kind of get an idea of what's going on. Well, very interesting. There were, if you're familiar with that part of the world, it's, Pakistan's right next to Afghanistan. It's a lot of Taliban activity. we were able to like see in real time the distribution of these Tariq-e-Taliban pamphlets that were being distributed in areas. Now, the Taliban actually, they seize on that humanitarian plight and say, look what the government's not doing for you. Well, we're going to do this, right? So actually watching that and how in real time people are reporting, hey, these pamphlets showed up here, it actually was able to give us kind of a line of this is where that Taliban influence is pushing, all the way up to these are where ambushes are happening of government facilities, protests are happening in real time, and we're able to steer our teams away from those particular areas. In some cases, just looking at protests in that part of the world turn violent and deadly very fast, right? So when you see those popping up in real time, especially going into where you can expand that event and then seeing, the real time traffic, right? I can then route my team around that, so they're not even in the area. So that's where it becomes, incredibly useful.
Super interesting, right? And sometimes, these are, little data points, especially when you're sitting in a different part of the world that they're not as necessarily immediately impactful or known to you until you're necessarily on the ground where you've got people right there, where these little signals become, extremely important that really inform your mindset and your overall kind of, posture on the ground, I'd imagine.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's another example from Ukraine, right? I'm literally sitting at my desk. I had Samdesk running, and I just happened to see an alert pop up. And it was a live stream video of someone on Twitter off the coast of Crimea. I mean, this was inside Russian occupied territory. And they were live streaming a Russian cruiser launching a cruise missile, right? So you could literally see these cruise missiles, being launched off this cruiser. And I just happened to notice a couple of, key landmarks, right? So I know exactly where that's at. So, what I did is I just quickly pulled up, what is the, cruising speed of this particular type of cruise missile? And, kind of like drew a line where these things were going on a map, right? And I just kind of hit a stopwatch and I'm just like, watching this and let's see what I can really do, right? So as these missiles flew over Odessa, I started seeing these Twitter alerts literally popping up saying, hey, we just heard this, because a Caliber cruise missile makes a very distinct noise when it goes over. So people were posting that. And so I'm like, oh, these are the same missiles going across. They're right on the right time act. And so we started like tracking these going all the way across Ukraine. And finally, when you start having those data points, you drew a line, you see right where the target was. It was Lviv. And, we have a fairly significant team in Lviv. So I was able to get on the phone, with them and say, look, you guys need to get to shelter now. You got, incoming cruise missiles. This was actually 12 cruise missiles that were launched from this, right? And they're like, at first they didn't believe me. They were like, hey, what's going on here? Our air raid alarms aren't going off or anything. I'm like, no, trust me. They're going to be there in like 15 minutes. And so finally they get down to the shelter. By the time they were starting to head down to the shelter, the air raid started going off. The alarms started going off. And then boom, 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 boom. Exactly the amount of cruise missiles, were hitting. They could hear them hitting. So we actually, by doing that, we were actually 7 minutes, full 7 minutes ahead of even the Ukrainian air defense system, which, that shows the power of this, like open source, intelligence gathering apparatus.
It almost triggers as part of your own brain, even again for us too, like having, building these tools and systems like Samdesk that just tap into those signals that you're seeing. It hits a certain almost unbelievability to when I'm being completely honest, right? And you talk to folks and you're like, well, we're dealing with, there's satellite signals, there's all these sort of like, information gathering tools and systems that are meant for this exact scenario. And they're very helpful and they're not, against each other, all supportive and they really are, right? So I'm not trying to create this narrative where, one is, you need them all, but it still seems, mind-boggling to me where, leveraging, tools like Samdesk, you can actually get ahead of an air raid siren system like that.
Yep. And what it boils down to is basically the Ukrainians are using radar signatures, right? So to validate, okay, we're not going to alert this whole region until we know it's going to be in that area. So, we're like literally just, we could have been just as wrong as we were right? But in our situation, I'd rather be wrong, have them down in the air raid shelter than, waiting for some radar indication that, hey, yeah, this is heading this way.
Right. Nate, I'm not sure if we can go down here, but I've heard stories from the team as well where we're, running, evac missions as well, right? So there's a certain bridge that got attacked in a certain way where like,
Yep.
you have an operational plan, walk us through the, preparation phase of an operation like that. I'm sure you've got contingency plans, but just walk us through, what are you guys planning for? What's the mission? And then how does, a real-time signal kind of help you respond in the moment and deviate in an operation?
Gotcha. So I got the perfect scenario for that one as well. It's not in a foreign country. It's actually here in the US. So Hurricane Ian, right? We were getting ready to respond for Hurricane Ian. We were, we go through this whole CONOP process where it's some of these slides can be, or these PowerPoint decks can be 50 pages long, right? With all this intelligence and stuff that we're gathering. But first thing I do is I'll go out and look, say, okay, what are the key locations that are going to be in our path, right? And I'll spin up a Samdesk feed based on those, right? And then we start looking at trends, other data points, plotting that course that we're going to take. So we go through, create this mission. Started executing. Left from Nashville. It was like 6:30 the day before it was actually supposed to make landfall. And as we're driving from Nashville all the way down to what we thought was going to be Tampa, Florida, right, is wherever I thought Hurricane Ian was going to get, we started seeing, how the storm was turning. But not only that, but seeing the Samdesk alerts to infrastructure being affected at the time. Because now this storm's like, now it's ahead of schedule and hitting further south, right? So it's hitting the Fort Myers area. So we were able to, like, using that as the storm is actually hitting, just now making landfall and then making this, curl up the center of Florida. We're able to use that to see, here's where the power outages are, here's where the damage is happening. We'll kind of steer around that. So we were able to skirt that entire storm and actually come in where almost no wind, we had almost no wind, no bad weather the entire way in, and actually landed in Fort Myers just as the winds were actually blowing out, right? And the winds had stopped blowing, but the storm surge was just going out. And we actually ended up just parking. We were like, okay, yeah, we're here way too early. We're just going to park off in this parking lot. And as we pulled off, all of a sudden we start seeing people coming out of, the people are trapped right then and there. We just instantly started executing. Well, turns out we were actually there by doing that, by using those tools. We actually were there 7 hours before even first responders were on the street. We're pulling people out of, their homes, helping them out of their vehicles where this huge storm surge just came through. And we were so early. In fact, hospitals were still on their lockdown. They wouldn't even take patients. So we had to create our own, casualty collection point and actually do triage and treating people in this parking lot right next to our vehicles after we had just drove like 19 hours in, right? So those tools, helped with that route planning, but not only that, but the actual real-time execution of that route as we're going into that disaster.
Incredible, humbling to hear, again, just the work that you guys do, but, the small role that hopefully we can support in that critical work. So Nate, let's, switch gears a little bit. What was life like before this? We're talking about, situational awareness about, Taliban activity on the border of Pakistan in a flood. Like all of the bad things kind of just compounding on each other, right? Like,
Yep.
Cruising missiles that you're getting ahead of by 7 minutes, 7 hours ahead of, landfall on a hurricane and things like that, right? So it sounds obvious, but let's just flesh it out and just kind of explain, what's happening in the ops center, what's happening for you in your world without these tools. What does the day-to-day and in situation things look like?
So my wife was not very happy with me, put it that way. A lot of time consumed. So we started, really the OSINT intel gathering apparatus the night the war in Ukraine started. So it was February 24th. There were days without sleep, actually just scrubbing through Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, trying to find any type of alerts on what's going on. Getting, finding a piece of information, then having to plug that into Google Translate just to make sure, figure out, number one, because I don't speak or read Russian or Ukrainian or Polish or, any of the other languages around that area. So I don't even know what posts are important, right? So I'm looking through having to translate every single thing one by one and go, yeah, this is important, this isn't. And just trying to correlate all of this into what's relevant to me and where the location is, validating that, looking at, hey, is this, then going looking at that poster, is this a Russian that's, sending me disinformation about, a Ukrainian, building that's been struck, or where a Russian checkpoint is in Ukraine, right? So all of that validation just took forever to get one usable, actionable piece of intelligence. It'd take 2 hours, right? And then that's just for one small piece that may or may not be used in the field. Times that by, as quickly as the war was moving and as rough as it was in the beginning, I mean, that just eats up all your time every single day, right? And it just literally turned into no time for family, no time for sleep. People are dying. We got to do what we got to do. And, that's where it was. So life was very rough before. And, with tools like this, it cuts that, tenfold down, right? Where now I'm seeing everything translated in real time. I can scan and say, this is relevant, this isn't. Just builds a narrative in my mind, or even who else is scrubbing that intelligence for me. They can start building the situational awareness up in their head on, hey, I remember this happened over here, which, it could be correlated with this over here and could mean this is going to happen tomorrow, right? You couldn't do that without those, without that real-time aggregation and translation tool.
Incredible. And I think, why I like kind of going down this path, Nate, a little bit, right, is because, you mentioned, it's the difference of, reactive versus, proactive versus reactive and that. And we agree. I mean, we use the same terminology at Samdesk all the time. We're trying to enable that, proactive posture. Sometimes it's lost on people, especially when you are in a GSOC, you're in the ops center, you're in the talk, wherever you are. I think sometimes leadership or the outside world doesn't see the scramble, right? Because there's a lot of hardworking folks who are, neglecting their family, unfortunately, to get the mission done. And that's just what needs to be done, right? So the results come out and they're like, well, you don't even really know how much I was hitting refresh on that page and scraping things and how many tabs, like my fingers are sore trying to get this thing out there. And that's sometimes the difference, right? That's what's on the ground happening in your office, your GSOC, wherever you are, your bedroom, to kind of get this work done. But I think what you're describing is, that's the definition in a lot of ways of a reactive thing. You're trying to scramble to catch up, to get ahead of and just produce something actionable for the people on the ground. And it's very difficult.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest feel goods is, an operator who was on that Pakistan mission and hadn't been on a mission since before we employed these new tool sets in our, new operations center process. And I mean, he came back and literally saying, I have never felt so supported and so protected in all my operations at Ariel. And I mean, that's the feel good moments, right? That you have when these hardened operators are like, dude, I didn't even feel this safe when I was in the military. Right. Or you have another operator that says, hey, I've been in a war zone, multiple times. We didn't have half this ability that we have here. It really, you don't want to pat yourself on the back, but you walk away patting yourself on the back. It's a real good feeling.
And it's totally possible, right? And I think this is the exciting time of where we live. I mean, we're looking around at all the global, volatility. You guys are living it. You're responding to it all the time. The rest of us, a lot of the viewers here, at least, have the benefit of the work too. And we get to watch these things at the 6 o'clock news, but everybody's aware of it. Everybody is aware of the global volatility. And it's not, that's a reality for sure, right? And so, but also we have got a lot of technological advancements. We now live in a time where we can deploy these things, right? And so there's also a lot of opportunity, truly, I think, to get better at a lot of these things. The world is changing and our tool sets, our mindsets, our processes, our teams need to reflect that, right? And so we talk to a lot of folks on both the defense side, the corporate security side, and first responder side of things. And that's the big mind shift of these tools and processes and the GSOC and the ops center that you guys are setting up. They're not nice. I mean, of course that's our position, but genuinely, I think they're not nice to haves anymore. They can't just be luxury items for what you're describing right now. We need to support the people in field, in country, wherever they are, even if it's our own kind of care of duty, duty of care responsibilities as corporations. Our traveling employees, our team members, right, require the support with this increased volatility. But all too often we see these as like cost centers. We're like, no, we can't afford these, and they don't have to be expensive. I'm sure you've done a great job, right, Nate, of building up a very efficient program for aerial, right? But anyway, the mind shift set there, and I'd love your thoughts on that, right? That's the crucial thing where I think, sometimes, unfortunately, they seem to be nice to haves, but the benefits are so clear to at least me and hearing the stories from you, Nate. They don't seem like nice to haves anymore. They feel much more like a must have.
I mean, that mind shift is happening, right? And so a couple of examples for that from, Pakistan, one of the largest NGOs in the world, contacted us and we're like, hey, we hear you're operating in Pakistan. We would like to get there, but this is kind of out of our wheelhouse. This is, a very dangerous place. Can you kind of advise us? So we get on the phone with them and kind of just give them a threat brief, right? And kind of showing some snippet of our tools and looking at that, their eyes are about this big around. They're like, how do you have this, right? And that's, turned into further relationships where now we have NGOs coming to us and saying, hey, help us, advise us on how to get to this location, or can you send, your operators plan and run the C2, the command and control, for us, because we have this capability. So, I mean, the need is there. And I think a lot of these NGOs are seeing that, and they know the need is there. They just don't know how to put it all together. Because it is a very different process to take all these different nodes and pieces and pull them into a cohesive, actionable, framework. That makes sense.
So where do we start then, Nate? What's your advice to other NGOs or other organizations looking at that? I mean, if you're trying to advise them on what you've recreated there, what are some of the tips and advice that you'd advise them to look at when they're thinking about deploying a program like what you've created at Aerial?
I think the biggest thing is, keep an open mind, right? There's tons of different resources, data sets that are all part. It doesn't just have to be the traditional intelligence piece, right? I mean, we've looked at, just these obscure, you wouldn't think it's any value in demographic data or this particular type of social media platform. And when you start pulling all these pieces together, the more data points you have, the clearer picture you have, right? The other thing is, I guess, don't think one tool, and this is just reality, one tool is not ever going to fit the bill for a complete situational awareness picture, right? You have to be able to diversify, but diversify smartly, right? Know what tools do what well and employ them. And I think one of the big mistake people start doing is trying to stretch to make one tool do things that it's not designed to do, right? You have to keep that in mind. So I guess the biggest, one of the biggest things is you have to invest in it, right? You have to invest in this process and you have to follow this process. So, I mean, everything has, this value and reward, or the ROI in investing in these kind of tools is, it's incredibly worth it. Samdesk has really changed everything. And I mean, I'd say that because I mean it, right? We could not be doing what we're doing without this tool, right? It has really been a game changer for us. So, thank you.
Well, look, I mean, great to hear all the stories, Nate, from, all those, deeply humbling examples. And then thank you for, the work that you do, the organization behind there, the mission you guys are doing. It's so noble. And we're delighted to support it in whatever small way that we can. Thank you so much again, Nate. Good to catch you before your deployment. Godspeed to everything you're working on next week. And myself, the team, any kind of customer success folks, whatever you need, we're also here behind you as well to make sure you get maximum value from the platform. And definitely appreciate your trust in business. It means a lot to us.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.